And I remember we were just sitting at either end of the lounge, just kind of in silence for a little bit, and he just got up and walked out. So this was probably about 8:30 at night, and he got out and walked outside and went and sat in his car in the garage. And anytime we would have an argument or anything like that, he would go to the spare room and just chill out there, and I would just, pester him until he gave in. But it was just so weird that he walked out, and about 10 minutes later, I hear the car start and the garage door open and his car leaves.
So remember what I said earlier about when even the most chilled brides can be pushed to a point of crazy at some point? Well, Amy and Ben both got there. The stresses of the past few days had reached fever pitch and regrettable things were said that couldn't be taken back. Ben had taken off, to his parents' place, Amy assumed, and she felt awful. How was this happening just 6 days before their wedding?
And so I start to ring him and he doesn't answer and he doesn't answer. And now I'm starting to become a little bit psycho, like, why? What's going on? What has been said? Like all these things are running through my head. And he finally answers, and it was really late. It was like about 11 o'clock at night. And I just said to him, I was like, are you coming home? And he's like, no. And I was like, oh my God, this has like never happened before. What's going on? I said, can you please just come home? And he's like, I'm sorry, I can't. I'll be home in the morning. And he hung up. And I was like in hysterics at home, just thinking, how has this gone from so good to so bad so quickly?
A sleepless night ensued, tossing and turning, a whole host of different scenarios playing out in her head. And as morning broke, there was still no word from Ben. All Amy could do was wait.
I was just sitting there and I was not really upset or crying yet, but I remember the door opened from the garage and he's walked through the back door, and through the screen he looked up at me, and I could see just in his face that things weren't right. And I remember he's opened the screen door and he has just said, I'm so sorry. And at that point I've just broken, and I remember I hunched over and I just started hysterically crying, and my chest started to hurt, like literally like a broken heart. And I'll just never forget that feeling. And I'm like, no, this isn't happening. And he's like, I'm so sorry. And I just was like, what is happening? And he's like, we can't get married. And I'm like, why? Like, he's like, and all he kept saying was, I'm just so sorry. And I just went into this buzz of like, I think like adrenaline kicked in, because I just was like nothing's going to fix this mode. I just remember, just being in hysterics, crying and just begging him to not do this. And I remember being like, do you know what you're doing? Like, do you really understand what this means? And I actually had 3 internal job interviews at my work that day that I had to go to. And I just remember he was like, I can't talk about this anymore. I'm emotionally exhausted. And I'll never forget him saying that, because I was so angry that he could just walk in, do that, and then just step back. And I went into this mode of like, well, I can't deal with this now either. I'm just going to get on with my day. And I just remember I got ready for the gym, and I went to the gym, and I remember I was halfway through the gym class and I was like, what are you actually doing right now? And I remember I turned to like our gym instructor and I was like, oh, I've just got a message from my mum. I've got to run. Like, I didn't even have my phone in the gym. I think I was just in such a state of shock that I was doing anything to face the reality of what was happening. And so I went home and I was in the garage in my car, and I call my mum and I'm in hysterics, just crying. And she just was in complete disbelief. And my mum just goes into, anytime there's a drama, she's the fix-it person. She's the one that, mediates situations and puts reason into situations. And she just couldn't even do that with me. She was just as broken, not understanding what was going on. And I've walked inside and Ben's in bed and he's like, I just can't talk about this now. I can't do this. And there's a knock at the door and I'm like, I'm not getting that. Anyway, he gets to the door and it's my parents. And I'm screaming at them to leave because I'm like, you're only going to make this worse. Leave. Like, I didn't want any outside involvement or anything to be blamed on them in the future of anything happening. And Mum's like, I'm not here to do anything, bad or say anything bad. I just want to get an understanding of what's going on. And I just remember like begging them to leave. And my dad, I'll never forget his face just being so broken.
She was in shock. She couldn't reconcile what had just happened, but Ben was refusing to talk. So she left. She needed to be away from him and let herself think and hopefully give him some time to come to his senses. This couldn't be the end.
I just remember having a sense of calm to me when I got home. And then I got home and he wasn't there. I called him and I'm like, where are you? And he's like, I'm not coming back. And I was like, can you please come and just talk? So he came over and I'm like, is this real? Like, is this honestly? And he's like, I'm so sorry, yes. And I remember going to him, do you realize that this decision is forever? And he said something to me like, well, no, I just called the wedding off, but you called us off. And I remember looking at him and I was like, no, that's not how this works. Like, you call the wedding off, you call us off. I can't come back from this if I can't understand why this has happened. And he still would not give me anything. He's like, I'm just so sorry. I can't get married. And I'm like, well, this is it for us. I was like, do you really understand that this is a forever decision? And he's like, yes. And that just like absolutely broke my heart. And I could see it on his face that he was hurting, but he'd made his decision and I don't know why.
Just like that, just 5 days out from their wedding, Ben had called it off with no real explanation. If this wasn't already gut-wrenching enough to have to try to deal with, Amy had the sickening realisation that the venue, the hairdresser, photographer, guests, everyone had to be told. The wedding wasn't just off. She had to actually cancel it.
And so our agreement was that he cancels everything and deals with everything to do with the wedding. I'm not having those conversations. I'm not having to explain anything. That's not. And I remember I made that and I said, this is your decision. You need to do these things. It's not my decision that this is happening. And he was like, okay. But he had his parents do it.
And while Amy was out of the house, there was apparently something else his parents had helped him do.
I've walked in and the place has been wiped. All of his stuff, which was pretty much everything we had on display, gone. Like, all that's left is our big furniture, like lounge, TV, bookcase, all that type of stuff. And I remember I stepped in and I've just gone, what the fuck? I turned into our bedroom and I can hear him crying. So I've turned into our bedroom and he's on our bed in like the fetal position, crying over the love letter that I mentioned earlier. He found that in the pile of stuff he had it and he's pulled that out, and a soft toy that he got me like in our first 6 months. So he's crying over this. And I just remember screaming at him to get the fuck up and get out. I was like, what have you done? And he's like, I'm so sorry. And I ripped the letter off him because I was like, this means nothing anymore. And I just was like, why? I was like, it's not even 24 hours after we called the wedding off and everything's gone. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I needed to get my stuff. And I was like, yeah, you can get a couple of things, but you literally have wiped our place out. You no longer exist in this house. Why? And why so soon? And he could not answer me. He couldn't answer anything I had to ask. He was standing in the kitchen up against the bench, arms crossed and just looking at the ground the whole time, just, broken.
But he didn't change his mind. The wedding was off. Amy and Ben were no more. Both moved back in with their parents, and Amy stopped trying to fight for him. Within about 6 weeks, their only correspondence was purely transactional.
And I was sitting at dinner with a group of people from work, and that day I had got a message of him of like, this is what needs to be done to close the bank accounts, etc. And I just wrote back to him that afternoon. I said, done. that was just it. I just don't want a conversation, done. And then I'm sitting at dinner that night and I get this message from him. And it is the longest text message I think I've ever received in my life. And it was him just everything coming out, just saying that he's struggling. You know, he has dreams about us and he wakes up and I'm not there, and how much that hurts him, and he doesn't know what he's done, and that I was the best thing to ever happen to him. And it wasn't a message asking for me back or anything like that, but it was just him just offloading everything he's felt in this whole time, and that he wishes only the best for me because I deserved that, and all this type of stuff. Like, it was just so emotional that I just sat in my car and I like bawled my eyes out for so long, just thinking, why? Like, where has this come from? And so all I could do is I just wrote back to him and I said, so why did you do it? Because it's forever been my burning question and I've never had an explanation to it. And the next morning I get a text message back that says, I don't know why, I just wish I didn't. And that was it. At that point I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm never going to get an answer and I'm never going to understand why this happened. But I've just got to move on.
So that's what she did. It wasn't easy, of course. Her heart was broken and her entire world as she'd known it was no more. But with a bit of time, a great promotion at work, and even reconnecting with her old school friends, she finally started feeling like herself again. Actually, better. She'd found a new sense of self and a sense of self-confidence she'd never had. She found this new self-confidence one day in a car park outside her ex-fiance's office.
It was probably around 3 months after we split that I was at the dentist, which was across the road from his work, and it was a Wednesday, and I knew that Wednesdays he worked on his own in the office. I'm sitting in my car and I'm like, I'm going to walk in. And for me to like, this is just so insane, and I don't know why. I literally could see my heart pounding out of my chest, like. And I'm walking over and I'm going up the stairs and I'm getting like even more and more like, this is so ridiculous, turn around. But I'm like, no, it'll be fine. But I still had no idea what to expect. And their office had a doorbell. And so I ring the doorbell and it's a glass door, and he comes around from the side and looks through the glass door, and we look at each other, and tears just came to his eyes, and then tears came to my eyes. And then he's opened the door and he's like, hi. And I was like, hey, I just saw you from the dentist. Like, it's something out of a movie. Like, it was so ridiculous. I was like, I was just over at the dentist. I saw you. I thought, and he's just looking at me like, what? And then he starts crying. Then I start crying, and he like invites me in, and we're awkwardly sitting across from each other. He's sitting at a desk and I'm sitting in the waiting chair, and we're just looking at each other, and I'm just like, this is so insane. And I remember saying to him, I didn't expect this to be so emotional. And he said, no, neither did I, like the first time I saw you again. And so we kind of just caught up on what's happening in our lives. And, I had booked a trip to Greece with two of my new best friends that I'd reconnected with after high school. He had started seeing a girl. He was about to go overseas as well with his best mate. And it was all good. Like, it felt all right. But I got back in my car and I just cried the whole way home. Like, that is what broke me. That was my breaking point. I got home to my mum and I just bawled, and I was like, I don't understand why this has happened. I don't understand why this has happened to me. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can ever move on, and all this type of stuff. I ended up actually seeing a psychologist, and it was the greatest thing I ever did, because she spoke about, those emotions post a breakup are very much like the stages of grief, because even though that person hasn't died, you've still lost that person and you're still going through the same emotions that you would if they had, the grief emotions when someone dies. And that really, really helped me move on.
So while Amy never got any answers from Ben or his family, she made peace with it. And with that peace came serious inroads to creating a magical new life for herself.
It was probably my birthday the next year that I had this like moment. So that's probably about 6 months after seeing him after the dentist, I had this moment of, I've really found myself. I've got this new confidence to me. I found these new friends. Well, not new friends. I reconnected with my old high school friends. And yeah, it was like a new life for me. It's one of those things at the time, everyone's like, you know, time heals, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and you feel like punching those people in the face at the time, but it's so, so true, and you don't realize that till a long time later, that it was the best thing to happen to me, because I would have never known this Amy and I never would have been this person. It's madness, and I always used to be that person, you know, in a relationship being like, oh, thank God I don't have to deal with any of that, and now I'm literally in the thick of it. But it's fun. Look, I haven't had anything serious since. I mean, it's not like I haven't tried. I'm like, I guess I'm obviously going to have some form of reservations around my next relationship, but I've also not had anything serious enough to really test that out. So I say to people, yeah, I feel like I will have trust issues, because I literally went from peak of happiness one day to the pits of my world is falling apart the next, with no idea that was going to happen. Like, to be told, you know, I can't wait to call you my wife one day, to calling off the wedding the next, with nothing in between to give you that sense of like, yep, this is going to happen, is really, really hard to let go of. And I say I really am not going to let that get in the way of a relationship. But yeah, the thought crosses my mind when like something does get serious, that how do I know you're not going to wake up tomorrow and turn to me and be like, yeah, it's over? Like, that thought's always going to be there, and I really don't want it to impact on future relationships, but sometimes you're not going to be able to help that. And one of the pieces of advice my mum gave me was, you know, in your next relationship is not to do what I did in terms of like throw my whole self and my whole world into that relationship. Still have your own world and your own life, you know, so that if things do fall apart again, you're not so alone. You've got that to fall back on. And I think that's the greatest thing, and that's something I'm very, very aware of now.